Fergus Bell. I work for a company called Samdesk, which is a startup working with verification workflows for newsrooms. I have a panel here who are going to introduce themselves as they answer the first questions in order to, we've got a lot to get through, and I want to make sure that we do that. This panel came about because a lot of us here have spent a lot of time talking about best practice for working with user-generated content or eyewitness media. We all know the best practices, but one of the reasons why we continue to have problems in moving forward is because we haven't tackled the issue about how we can apply these best practices in a competitive environment, because we are all competitors and we are operating, journalists are operating in a competitive environment. And it seems that we really can't resolve some of these issues without first addressing this. We're going to cover a couple of different topics related to the ethics of user-generated content, and I'm going to ask various members of the panel to give their thoughts and impressions on best practice in the context of competition. And then we're going to, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss it. Claire Wardle, who is sitting over there, who if you were in the last session, you'll know her. She is going to be helping to facilitate the conversation from the room with you. So if you have a question or a comment, please make yourself known. Okay, so let's start. The first thing that we're going to start with is the issue of verification when it comes to ethics in a competitive environment. And we've got a couple of different examples for each one. So just as a starting point, this is a screenshot from the Syria Hero Boy incident, which I don't believe did anyone on this panel use it? Please? No, okay. So this is, for those of you who don't know, this was a video that appeared on YouTube, and it purported to show a boy being shot at. It wasn't real. It was a fabricated piece of content injected into the kind of social content stream coming out of Syria with the hope of fooling journalists. And I just wanted to use this as a starting point to kind of ask some of the panel, perhaps starting with Chris, what are the best practices for verification in a newsroom, in kind of headline form, really, that can help newsrooms avoid this and get it out without succumbing to the pressures of competition? How can we put something like this through how did you put something like this through the verification process when actually other people were starting to use it and it was incredibly compelling content?
So I guess in terms of the context of competition, sorry, I'm Chris Hamilton, social media editor for BBC News. Yeah, that's probably what we need to say. So actually, I think for this kind of example, I think is probably in a way less relevant when it comes to competition, certainly from, I think, where I sit, because I think for many news brands running with something like this and it then turning out to be a hoax, the thing you're obviously going to be thinking about is the damage to your brand. Whereas I think some potentially, I don't know what other examples we're going to have, but obviously I think there are other cases where there's just a piece of content, you basically it's true, you're going to run it, obviously you will still do your verification checks, but there then comes the whole issue around permissions and some of the stuff we were getting at before. Whereas with this, I think the starting point was the sourcing is really unclear. There's been plenty of examples of stuff like this being faked. The whole everything in this environment is potentially very risky, so you can take your time, you don't have to rush into it, but essentially the first thing we say is just look at it. Is there anything about it that doesn't stack up? Just you don't have to, there's a lot of talk about kind of almost CSI style, looking into data and doing lots of really investigative, deep research around a piece of content, and absolutely you have to do that often. But sometimes all you have to do is just look at something and just start to get a bit of a feel for it. And I think, as evidenced by the fact that although lots of this serious stuff quite often gets people saying it's fake, there was even more of it than normal when this came out, because I just think there was something about it that for a lot of people who didn't just fall for it straight away, just thought there's just something about this that there's the too good to be true test. So that's a good starting point. But fast forward into kind of the technical stuff, which we were suspicious about it. There were a few different bits and pieces, but the thing it turned on, by the way, it's very, very realistic. It was filmed by these Danish guys as part of a project to try and elevate the fate of children caught up in war. They did a very good job, but the thing that kind of really struck was that when the bullets apparently hit the boy, for a few frames, nothing happens, he carries on. There's no apparent effect, which isn't what you'd see if it was real. And there are a few other bits and pieces that didn't quite stack up, and on that basis, we didn't run it.
Okay, so just to follow up then, how verify? One of the things that I think we have trouble with is that everyone has a different terminology when they come to verification. Some organizations will say, this has been verified because we've spoken to the user, this has been verified because it's been put through a process, this has been verified because we've received it from an agency. What does verified mean? And also, and I might wonder if after you we get some comment from Mark, because Storyful have been very good at putting out the verification process for everyone to see, and something like this would go about debunking it. So which other people don't do, and that's not part of the verification process. So to summarize, how much should we verify something? Is there a common place we can get to in terms of verification?
Yeah, that's
you're not here to answer easy questions.
I don't think there is I've been approached, I'm sure others have, there are kind of sometimes academic attempts to kind of build tools to help us. And one of the things I quite often start off by saying is that, there's no kind of, there's no metric. You can't say, well, this has gone past the 85% barrier. Because every story and every piece of content is going to be different. And so I think it's really difficult I just don't think you can come up with a metric like that will help you. So sometimes it will come down to, the same as with other editorial judgments, it's about, okay, if it's nothing to do with UGC, sometimes we've got this source, we've got this other piece of evidence on this story, we've got something else here, that for us gets us over our line. Sometimes that goes wrong, it can go wrong spectacularly. BBC's been burnt by that. Rolling Stone is obviously a bit of a topic of conversation, the festival this week, as another example. So there is a kind of element often of that we don't know enough. This is an example of that. We couldn't find the source. Obviously that's often the first thing you want to try and do. So you've got to take a judgment. Now, whether you can share the steps that get you there and the information you have to get you there to help others, obviously that's a question. There are some attempts to do that. There's some couple of Google Plus forums, for example, where news organisations are doing that.
Well, I wonder if then we can throw over to Mark, because Storyful is well known for opening up the verification process. And where do you think we are, or where do you think we can go with verification and allowing people to understand what that means as an industry?
Well, the first thing is just to, again, you can't emphasize enough the importance of verification, not just because it's right, but because it's not necessarily 100% embraced by every newsroom. There's a sort of an amorality about content from the social web. It's, it's out there, it's public, so we just discuss it, and we don't pay a lot of attention to moving forward to verify. That's still prevalent. I think from our point of view, from Storyful's point of view, because, and I'm really glad you put the word competitive into this panel, because we're a business, and so our business will stand or fall depending on the quality of our verification. So we have an incentive there. Secondly, we have to work out systematic processes which are based on what we call the human algorithm. It starts with, obviously, forensic journalism. It then goes on to technology, and then it ends with collaboration. So they're the three core elements, I think, of verification, of how you start to industrialize the process almost. The forensic journalism, again, it starts with, exactly as Chris said, Is it too good to be true? Because it often then is not true. And so essentially in those cases, there are so many things we can do. We can, the forensic questions that we will ask will all be about the elements that we need to corroborate or to clarify. Date, location, individual who uploaded. Very key thing is this the original copy of the content? Because in so many cases when content is copied and scraped, as we say, elements will be affected, changes will happen. And so therefore you have to get to the original. Also you have to identify the original uploader, and you have to know that they are the person who actually shot the video. Sometimes people will take from their family members or people who they know content and then upload it. So that's the first thing you have to work out. There's a lot of techniques, and we can go into detail on them in relation to things like shadows, in relation to time of day, in relation to the things we can see in the background of a video. Does it make sense? But the technology was really interesting for me, because I think there are opportunities for us together as an industry to start collaborating around technology as much as workflow. So for example, in our case, in the discovery of the content, important clues emerge when you find something. Geolocation. If it comes at Instagram, it's much easier to identify location. When you find the source, you engage with them. You listen through technological ways of monitoring conversations to other things that are being said about the content. And then when you get the content, you have a whole series of open source tools, from Google Maps, Google Earth, to a whole range of technology we've developed around Chrome extensions, and internal processes that we have, that I think some of which we can open source and have done. The final bit of a collaboration is where it gets really interesting and gets competitive. So you have to understand, and again, just for a high level of view of where we've come, it used to be that we all traded in scarcity, right? So there was very little information out there. We as journalists hacked away. We got that information, and we were the only ones who could push that out. Fast forward to the age of the eyewitness. Now everything's already out there before we entered the fray. And in that case, I think there's much more competitive pressure to be right than there is to be first. I think the age of the scoop, at least in breaking news terms, is over. Because we no longer have the ownership of that content, essentially, we just can't hide behind the silos of proprietary interest. In that case, we have, for example, with Google's help, formed the Google Open Newsroom, which is a concept I think that we can take to the next stage in the coming months, where essentially we might go out and say, we don't know, can you help us? In the case, for example, of Ukraine, in the case of Syria, we worked with people like the BBC, like the range of organizations represented here today, people like Elliot Higgins, Bellingcat, who, if you don't know, is one of the primary sources on armaments and munitions in conflict zones around the world. So we will ask questions. For example, chemical weapons attack in Syria last year. We know that we have video that seems to show victims suffering from the impact of chemical poisoning. In that particular case, we put it all together, but there's one little problem. The timestamp on the video says it precedes the actual event as described. And we went around and around, and someone pointed out, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said, no, this can't have happened, because the timestamp's inconsistent. And someone just pointed out, well, YouTube's in San Bruno, California, so it's Pacific Standard Time, and the mystery was solved. And that could have only happened by us going out there, working with other people outside of that sort of proprietary silo, and asking people to help. And that's really, I think, the core element as we move forward: technology and collaboration.
I think that's a very interesting point, and the analogy that I make is that we've often, in the past, we've come to a common understanding on certain things as an industry, like the way that we protect sources, the way that we defend each other for doing that. Yet this type of technology and type of storytelling, we haven't really had the chance to sit back and get together and work out where we do have this common ground. And I think actually we are learning a lot of lessons, and we can probably still be competitive if we share some of our knowledge on this and in order to come to a better place. We have got lots to get through, but since we're talking about verification and kind of the active debunking and opening that up, I want to get Craig's opinion on that, and specifically the kind of competitive reasons why we might debunk or why we might not, and when to share something openly and when not to. Because even yesterday I was talking to someone and they were describing how we might put that process out there, but there's dangers of debunking as well. I wonder if you could briefly touch on that.
Sure. So I'm Craig Silverman. I have a project called Emergent where I track and work to verify and debunk online rumors, and I also did a research project looking at how news organizations cover online rumors, and when they touch them, when they sort of give them wider exposure, when they actually try and debunk them. The competitive piece of this is really big, because I think what we've heard from Storfel and BBC, who are two organizations who have, I think, very clearly articulated the competitive advantage when you have very high verification standards and when that aligns with your brand. Storfel has built products and a reputation out of that. BBC has a worldwide long established brand to protect, and they've decided, well, putting stuff out there that we're not sure about doesn't align with our brand, that's not our competitive advantage. There are lots of people for whom they believe that is their competitive advantage. They say, well, everybody else is waiting. Maybe this Syrian boy video is true. I bet if everyone else is quiet and we put it out, we'll get lots of hits for that. And there are plenty of places that are doing that. This was, sort of what I looked at in my research. And so, for them, the incentives are pretty easy. They're usually newsrooms that are focused on frequency and volume in terms of content production. Get as much stuff out there as fast as possible. And also, when it comes to stuff that's kind of emerging content, things that people haven't really seen yet, or that's not getting a lot of traction online yet, for them, the incentive there is, well, if we have it first and we have a big platform and a website that a lot of people go to, then we do get first on it, and we will capture the shares and the initial attention on it. And it may only be a short flare for them, but that's enough. They're a volume business, and they want as much content getting as many shares and as much traffic as possible. So that is, that's the other side of the competitive piece of it. And the danger there, obviously, is when stuff turns out to not be true. What we saw in the research is they don't tend to go back and actually correct or put that up there. There were some people who went with the Syrian boy video, and some of them updated stuff, and some of them just put it up there. So that's the competitive tension. There are the people who think, well, if we get it up early, and we just maybe we'll go back to it later, or maybe we'll just put a word allegedly or rumored around it to kind of flag it, then that's good enough. They feel like they've done their job. And then there's the other end of the spectrum that's represented up here, which is people saying, no, your competitive advantage is never screwing up and being a place that people trust, and you build that over time. And I think that there's absolutely a battle going on between those two things.
Do you think that the audience discriminate between the two kinds of organization doing that? Do you think that the audience can make the split in their mind about one type of organization dealing with it in one way and another in another? And if not, then what's the point?
Yeah, so I don't know of research in this specific area to point to. The stuff that's out there in terms of what makes people really aligned with a news organization, political leanings is often one. If they view a news organization as being aligned with their views politically or other deeply held views, they're more likely to trust what's coming out there. So the element of veracity, the element of accuracy, is something that if you look at studies about what do people value in media, that's always near the top of the list. So that's the thing that people say they value, but what people will say in a survey and then what they actually do are often not the same thing. And I guess that's the sort of caveat I'd put on it. Like, there are a lot of people, if you talk to, they would say, yes, if something comes from the BBC, I trust it, and if I see something from BBC, I treat it differently than something from, X news organization. And there are plenty of people who feel that way. To generalize overall, does everyone in the audience care? Unfortunately, I think there are lots of examples of very large websites who take the strategy of just throwing up anything they can possibly find. So that there's an argument that there are a lot of people who don't care.
So can we compete? Can the industry compete with this minority parts of the industry that don't care and put it out first?
I think you can. So through the research and some of the stuff I've done, I talk about what I call the viral content strategy, which is, well, if something is getting attention and traffic that is going viral and it's either suspect or not yet confirmed or outright false, I think that there is a way to jump on that and to show your values and to burnish your brand by being the one who steps up and says, here's what we don't know about this, and here's why we've been holding back on it. So I think there is an entry point for news organizations with higher standards to get in and not just ignore this stuff when it's circulating and you're trying to go through your verification process. This is, I think, goes to Mark's argument of being more open about a verification process. Rather than being silent until you have your yes or no answer, if it's already out there and circulating, finding ways to engage where you're actually communicating the complexity is I think, a strategy for places with higher standards. And then if you know it's false, to actually go out and treat that like something that's really interesting and really true. I don't think we do enough of the debunking and publish that and promote it enough. I think there is some opportunity there.
Okay, and then just briefly, Alison, and I wonder if I can get a quick answer from the others as well. I think that, I wonder if you would agree if we are beyond the days of this video or this photo could not be independently verified. Are we, maybe we can't be brief about that, maybe, and if, what do you think about that? Do you think that we need to hide behind that? Do you think that it undermines the work that we do? Am I leading you with these questions? But
No. Yeah, hi, I'm Alison Gow. I'm the Digital Innovation Editor for Trinity Mirror, and I work with the regional titles. So the consequences for a local title, online or in print, getting it wrong are far greater reaching, I think, than some of the big national brands who may not deal with, the big splashy stories like shootings in Syria particularly, but we live in the communities that we're reporting about, and if we are reporting an incident at a school and putting a video up without having verification, and we have panicked an entire community around that, then that's on us for forever, really. That is a stain on our reputation and takes away from our credibility. And I do think that particularly at regional level, there has been a lot more collaborative efforts to try and talk to other titles that aren't part of the groups to say, potentially, that is not right if they've got it up. I've never had a problem with ringing a news desk and saying, I think that actually you need to check what you just put out. In terms of an independent, of some kind of verification panel, we've got the editor's code in the UK that says you should not and must not produce anything that is incorrect, whether that's images, pictures, videos, whatever. And so there's that aspect of having to adhere to it. But if there was something whereby there was like an Amber Alert that could go out around media, I think it would be extremely useful.
okay, Chris.
Bloggers as well, sorry, not just for media actually, for indies, we shouldn't exclude them.
There is going to be a lot of crossover with the other topics that we're going to be discussing, but since you had such a clear reaction to my statement.
It was the question about whether we've moved beyond. So basically, there's a phrase that we use or did use that when we run with something that we haven't basically been able to bottom out to the extent we would where we'd be able to contact the source. So we've used this phrase, not being able to independently verify. Now, I agree that it's not great. It's better than what I've also seen being used, and that's by ourselves as well as others, which is we haven't been able to verify it, which I just think gives a terrible signal, especially when normally you have done verification. That's why you're using it. And I think it's used as a kind of shorthand. And I think it's one of these classic things where we kind of know what it means, and we're using it as a way to sort of give a bit of a signal to the audience or readers about what we've done with a piece of content. I still think there's a need, and I think it's part of the whole, of that opening up of the verification process to be clear with your audience about what it is about what you've done with this and what status this piece of content has.
So you think that it, and I'm not asking this in an aggressive way, but you think it's okay to put content out there that is unverified as long as you're clear, as long as you're saying it?
No. So my point is that I disagree. I don't think you can put it, because unverified is one of the things I always remember is when the day that when Osama bin Laden was killed, and a picture, that great phrase, did the rounds, right? So on Twitter and the news organisations picked it up, a picture supposedly of his corpse. All sorts of jokes you can make there, which would probably be inappropriate, so I won't. But it was a slice together of a picture of him with a gory picture that someone had found down the back of the internet somewhere, and they stuck them together, and this is the corpse. And I remember that some of the news organisations that carried it as the reason, the justification for carrying it. I can't remember. I think it was Craig who alluded to this. It's out there. So actually it was Mark. It's out there. So that's the justification. Is it's out there. So we're covering it as a piece of news. So I don't think that's legitimate, and I don't think you can do that and cover yourself by saying, we haven't been able to verify it. But I do think there needs to be some way of signalling that, because often stories that we cover, most stories we cover, we want to reach a standard of 2 independent sources or whatever it is. And I think where you haven't been able to reach that standard, but you are confident that what you've got is real, is what it appears to be, I think there does need to be a way of signalling that.
So I want Mark to respond in a moment, but I want to get down to the meat of it, because why can't you then get those 2 sources before you put it out? And my assumption is because of because we're in a situation where the competition may have got there or is getting there. I feel like this comes down to competition, and this is what I'm trying to get at. What would you need to be able?
No,
or
I
you don't
think
think
I think there are lots of other things that are down to competition, but I don't think this is it, because I think there are often we're carrying, and I think the reason that phrase we started using it during the Arab Spring, where that volume of content that was coming out from all kinds of places where you just couldn't you couldn't talk to the source, but often clearly it was telling you something that was going on, that was happening and was real, but you couldn't go to the original source because they were activists who didn't want to be contacted. It could be very dangerous for them.
Okay. Mark?
I'd love to see more people saying we cannot independently verify this, as long as they include the next sentence will be so we won't use it. And rather than be facetious here, I mean, I think that is actually true. I think I'd also like to hear in newsrooms someone screaming at the top of their voice, this cannot be independently verified, so go fucking verify it. Like, I think the thing I'm trying to put here, and it goes to your point in competition, the competitive urge should kick in when it's not independently verified. And, obviously it's Storyful, we built a business on this, and I should have said, sorry, I'm the director of innovation, the founder of the company. I think ultimately for me, knowing the competitive advantages there's a way we can enhance it, I think, together. I know we'll talk about practical steps later, but, we do a thing called #DailyDebunk, which is where we feel like something is wrong or needs to be verified, and we push it out there. I'd love to invite other journalists to try and hijack that. I'd love everybody to use that. I'd love us to go out there and know that if you have that hashtag attached to something you've done on your social platforms, you can see that if you're the first to do that, there's huge competitive advantage to be constantly seen to be the people who are out there putting out the daily debunk.
Yeah, I'm sure that can't be abused at all, though, by people who wish to say that something is false.
But again, the incentive here, you see, I think that's clearly come back. How do we amplify the incentives for newsrooms to take the competitive urge to go out and prove something or disprove it, as opposed to be the first to print? And I take Greg's point. I mean, some are incentivized still to grab the million hits. But how can we create those incentives rather than wave our fingers? And I thought the session before was great because it did show us that we can't wave fingers at newsrooms and tell them don't do this. What we can do is say here's the reason you should, and here are the incentives in a competitive environment.
Okay, so we've got lots more to get through. Claire and I, before this session, we didn't tell you, but we made some assumptions about what might be agreed upon. So we can add to these, and we'll tweet them out. But just to kind of summarize, best practice: establishing a verification process in your newsroom, and then sticking to that. So you know what your process means. You know what to do when that happens. Open verification processes, transparency to the audience and users, and debunking when appropriate. I think would it be a fair?
You guys are mind readers.
Yeah,
it's terrifying.
It's almost as if we've heard you before. But we've talked about all of this before, and so we're trying to move on to the next one, and I feel like we might be starting to. So I'm going to move on to the next thing, and we'll see how you do with the next round of predictions. So crediting. And I hastily borrowed a screenshot from Pete's presentation before, but crediting is becoming a huge issue in terms of getting stuff out quickly, embedding, crediting YouTube, crediting users, crediting user names. I just wanted to get a brief kind of thoughts from each of you. Brief this time on that, and we'll start with Alison. On what you think best practice is for crediting user-generated content for eyewitness media.
Okay, you should. If you've got the original source, you should always ask them if they want to be named, how they want to be named, if they want their real name or their handle. If they don't want to be named, then it should say clearly in the content that it was provided by a person who is known to the journalist, but who is asked not to be named, not a source, because I think that whole phrase is just tainted. You know, press officers are now described as sources, and you should never credit Twitter, picture YouTube. That drives me nuts. But to be fair, I think in Trinity we've been kind of training that not to happen since about 2008. So yeah, to be brief, just credit the right person, but ask them if they want to be credited.
Okay, great.
You know, the one thing I'd add to that really quickly is that I think one of the reasons why we get these horrible crediting things, one, there's sort of a lack of understanding and appreciation for the content uploader and creator, but the other piece is that it's often that they're not actually doing a verification process, so they don't know the person that they should be crediting or how they should be crediting it. So I think it's, you know, when you see those things happening today, there's usually, you know, something going on with their process behind it that left them to that point. So you can sort of connect these two things in a lot of cases, but I totally agree with everything she said, and I won't add to that.
Chris?
Yeah, pretty much agree. A couple of things to say. One is make sure that it's not really fuzzy and pixelated when you credit them. The other is the thing absolutely about, you know, it's often I think there's sometimes a bit of a charge for everyone always wants to be credited, and actually sometimes they don't, as Alison's alluded to. And I do think there is, and this isn't a kind of attempt to get wriggle room, but I do think there is a real issue about where sometimes when it's difficult to talk to someone, and you might have to make assumptions about what they want. And certainly, where you do talk to someone, asking if they want to be credited and not making an assumption they want to be, because it was touched on the last. I wasn't present for all of the last panel, unfortunately, because the one I was in overran. But that was the whole thing of you know, what people's intentions are, and sometimes they might be happy for their content to be used, but they might be happy for it not to be credited. But apart from that, yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, so I think it is absurd for anyone to say credit YouTube. You know, it's like saying credit Gmail, credit telephone. Like, it's how it came to you, not, you know, where it came from. The second thing is that these people, this is not content. These people are sources, right? So, and I think it's something Claire said in the last panel is, you know, you will ask your source everything, including how they want to be described. It's just the same thing. And so therefore, I think when you ask a source, they can come up with different answers. I don't think there's any fixed template here, and that's one thing I would try to avoid. Sometimes people will want their name. Sometimes their Twitter account. Sometimes if they have a commercial advantage to having people driven to a YouTube account, they'll give the YouTube channel. So there's no set template, but it all comes down to your responsibility to the source.
Yeah, I did. That's the other point I was just wondering about. I mean, I agree that you shouldn't say credit YouTube. You shouldn't use YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, as a substitute for crediting the person. But sometimes as a way of telling your audience just the place where you've got something. That I just sometimes think
is the place, is it always so relevant? I mean,
why
is it relevant that a video came from YouTube if it's
I think one of the occasions, and this is a tricky one, but one of the occasions where someone doesn't want to be credited, okay, and I think certainly if you have anyone here, although I work for the BBC, I don't come from a kind of TV broadcast background, but I certainly think there is that feeling of, okay, well, this clearly hasn't been filmed by us, as it, you know, because it's really shaky or whatever, but it's, so where's it come from? And so as part of the thing of being clear with audiences or readers or whatever about your sourcing, that then I think sometimes there can be a role for naming the platform, but I don't think as a substitute for the crediting rules that we're talking about.
So then to play devil's advocate, when we are thinking about embedding content, embedding tweets, Instagram, we should always ask permission to embed so that we can ask them how they wish to be credited.
When you embed it, it's automatically their credit.
Yeah, but they may wish to be. What we have talked about is the fact that you might not wish to be credited, and when we're embedding, we are getting unless you have asked every person that you're embedding how they wish to be credited, if they wish to be credited.
Well, the exclusion there is if, with the agreement of the source, you put it onto your own platform, your YouTube channel, your Twitter account, and then you just retweet or embed that. That's something I think that works, but I think it's a good point. Sometimes people will not want to be identified. And so in the end of the day, you know, a screen or whatever is real estate. Every piece of that is precious, and to that extent, you know, the minimal credit is always going to be better for an organization. But I think the platforms have done a really good job of forcing us to send people to the place where people wanted to be seen. But if they don't want to be seen, there are alternatives.
Alison, did you want me to make a final
Just
point?
quickly, is that when people have embedded something, if they don't want to be and they delete it, it will vanish from yours. I see it as kind of an embed as a window onto their page. So
That's all very well, as long as your news organisation can embed content, because then there's that intent, and there are definitely some organisations who don't even have the CMS capability to embed.
Just one of the challenges around this, of course, is we could say, yeah, you should always, wherever you're embedding, whether it's sort of proper full embedding or whether it's a scrape, which is basically what you're talking about, where you take a screen grab of some kind, and yeah, asking permission makes sense. But of course, let's say a prime minister or a president tweets something or puts something on Instagram. Now, I don't think any of us would suggest, how many people asked President Obama for permission to embed the 4 more years, whatever, I think the picture that was captioned. So, okay, that might be a no-brainer, but then where does that line fall in terms of
The
celebrities?
BBC guidelines talk about intent.
Yeah.
And I think with Obama, if he puts out a photo after having been re-elected, his intent is that is to be shared and used in a certain way. And I think intent is actually something that has been wildly ignored. And as we saw in the example in the previous panel, where that woman had her face everywhere because she happened to have the only photo from an incident, the intent was not
It's very clear. There's 4 categories. There's public, i.e. the person who put that out wants it to be seen by a mass audience and their political party or state, so there's no need there to go clarify it. There's cleared. We've talked to the individual, and they've said what their intent is here. There's license. They want to make some money out of it, and they want to have the proprietary interest. And then there's contact. We don't know. You got to go find out from that person. They haven't made their intent clear, but it's really newsworthy, and that's where the grey area appears.
I think that is an excellent breakdown, but my only fear about that is that we know that, we understand all of that, but the people who are actually involved don't necessarily understand what those 4 categories might even mean. And perhaps if we're going to think, going back to what you said at the very beginning, Mark, about actually kind of pooling our resources a little bit or our knowledge to get to a point where we do educate that audience and they do know what it means, perhaps that is the first step in being competitive. So I want to just sum up what I predicted that you were going to say. Always credit the individual, ask the person how they want to be credited, and establish a transparent policy for crediting platforms. So I think we got to that spot on, and there was nothing missing there.
You forgot legibility.
Okay. So permissions and payment, which I think comes neatly after crediting. And I think we have this is an example, and this is a bit of a naming and shaming, I'm afraid to say, but this is an example of an Instagram photo that was shared, and this is an automated permission system that allows you to ask for permissions for UGC. So you can see there a weather channel has asked for to see if this person can give permission to use the photo with credit to them. If so, please comment with the automated yes weather tag, and you can view the terms there. Now the person has definitely replied and said, I screen captured it from a live video feed. This specific frame doesn't exist out there on its own as part of a video. You're welcome to use it with credit for sure. This is where it came from. Yes, weather. Thanks for letting us feature your photo. So the automated process of this has completely ignored what has actually been said by the user. And then a certain Washington paper has asked the same question of using exactly the same app. And the person did exactly the same thing again. This is not their content to give. They are being incredibly transparent about it, and they probably don't even understand about transparency issues in the way that we do. Yet this content is maybe being used, and permission has been got from the wrong person. So permissions is a huge minefield. We know legally that if you ask for permission, you're more protected, even if you don't end up getting it. So I want to ask from the panel your thoughts on permissions, when we need to get permissions, and what is the definition of getting permission on social media? Is a tweet enough? Is a yes, you can use this enough? Let's start with Alison.
Okay. Should we get my mouth shut? Okay. So no, a tweet isn't enough in my view. If it taking away from a breaking news incident, something that you've seen that's like a quirky picture from Twitter that you want to use, can we use it? Sorry. Can we use your picture initially is the first question, and can we contact you? And then I would expect to move to email fairly swiftly, and the questions I would want to know if I were going to publish that and not be faced with a massive bill at the end of it would be, are you the original, did you take this photo? Are you the original source? Although when I saw that a few days ago, I then thought I've got to revise that question again because she did take that photo, but it's not her photo to take.
It was a screen grab.
Yeah.
it was
So,
hers. You bet.
Yeah, so is it your photo? Can we use it? Did you take it? Would have been. Are you happy for us to use it in all our titles? Because, you know, people may not realise with Trinity Mirror it might appear in the Huddersfield Examiner, but then it might be on Mirror Online the next day, you know, so, or within an hour. So are you happy for us to use it in all your titles? Do you want payment? I would never expect a member of the public to just assume that they would be able to negotiate things. So you should ask, you know, and you should pay a freelance, transparent rate on that.
Okay, just before I get, I'm just going to show another example. Am I going to show you another example? No. Do I have one here? Yes. So I've blanked out the name. Wait.
That's the ONN, yeah, the Onion News Network.
So this is a tweet, and a completely anonymous. I've anonymized it. That. Oh, hey, would love to use some of your pics. Can blank use on our platforms and distribute worldwide to our affiliates in perpetuity? Chris, well, so is a tweet enough? What do we need to do for permissions?
So I think in some situations, I think a tweet is.
By the way, note the response here.
Yeah.
Yes, you may.
It's really tricky though, because I think it could be depending on the situation and the clarity that you provide in the question and the clarity of the answer you get back. So I think in some situations, I think you've got to judge it case by case. I think Alison's outlined a brilliant kind of gold standard. This, you know, it goes back to the competitive thing, I guess, or not competitive in the sense of what's everyone else doing, but just in the sense of how likely is it in some situations, you know, breaking news situations, helicopters just crash in front of you, you're being inundated with requests. The whole can you come over to email and deal with that? That's the, and I don't know what the answer is. You know, there's tension there.
Well, and I think you've hit on a point which we're definitely going to discuss in a moment, which is inundated with requests. I mean, we've all seen situations where multiple news organisations are asking for permission to use the same piece of video or photo around breaking news. Mark, just since you work for an organisation that has kind of nailed getting permissions for this stuff, what's your opinion on it?
So by the time you go to the tweet, you have to have done an awful lot of work to set up a template to do this. Now, you know, the hashtag YesWeather is a dreadful way of doing it, but if you notice in the previous example, they did actually have a direction to a link that sent you to the very clear terms and conditions of what you're asking for. So in our case, you know, we would have, well, it's cleared means there's a very clear legal statement of what that is. By the way, that's illegal with that person, if they use the content in that context. In perpetuity, only can be covered by a license, which is a very different thing. In our case, this is a public utility. We're trying to get clearance on it. Send people transparently to where they can see the full legal agreement, hopefully simplified in a way that they can understand it. The second thing is, by the time you get to send the tweet, you know you've done the verification. The previous example, knowing a little bit more about it, is it was TBN live chasing, you might have seen at the top, which meant that they were saying this is cool. They were telling you they actually didn't have the copyright, and copyright's the key. Not whether they took a photograph, it's whether they have the copyright. That they can't tell you that sometimes, most times. You have to know and you have to establish. So the verification still is at play here. And then once you get them and you've contacted them, a tweet is enough if you've done the verification initially, if you want to go to air with it. But to know that you can actually push it out, in our case to clients, we need to know that they have witnessed the actual legal agreement and they understand it.
So when you send people to those clear terms, do they have to like click an accept button there at all, or it's when they reply to you that it's considered accepted? I'm just curious.
When they have explicitly said, I agree to these terms, are you going to use this? You can summarize them by saying, is it okay for all of our clients to use this content? But also remember, we're only establishing a temporary right here in the clearance stage. Under fair dealing, fair use, which is all over the world, has very different characteristics. Essentially, this clearance falls away. They retain the copyright and can do what they want in a day, 2 days. So this is very much just a very quick couple of days. It's in the public interest. We want to use it now. And as long as you're confident they understand that and the terms, and you're confident they are the copyright owner, then in these cases, and this is a very small set, I think we would, that's, I think, good.
So I want to address quite a specific issue around being ethical and competitive in the act of asking for permission. Do you think that it's effective and ethical to write your request, stack them on top of everyone else's, and there can be hundreds in there? Is that a sustainable model for getting permission, or do we need to is there something that we can do to fix that? And if so,
do you mean like an agency approach?
I don't mean I mean exactly what I say. It's not putting 10 requests or 100 requests from every single news organization. And in the case of, there was the Charlie Hebdo, the videos, there were a small number of videos and photos, and these people were bombarded by the press. And even when they removed their content from the platforms, the news organizations hunted them down in order to secure the permission. At what point do we stop, or at what point do we change it, and at what point do we realize that hounding people is going to stop them from sharing this stuff with us in the first place? So I'm going to, as a moderator, I shouldn't, but I'm going to say that system is broken. There's got to be a better way, and I'm not interested in talking about all the ways that it's broken. I'm more interested in trying to work out with a high caliber panel how we might fix it.
Look at the past, how we responded in the past. We pooled. One of my first jobs was in Northern Ireland in the height of the Troubles there, where one of the jobs for a reporter was to knock on the door of a victim's family and ask for a photograph. But instead of having a line of reporters waiting at the door, we pooled that photograph. So one day it would be the PA's responsibility, the BBC's responsibility, my station, RTE. We went out, got it, we pooled the photograph. And I think, that's a big challenge to ask us in the modern age to do that, but that's the only way out of this, is that we work out some code, not an official pool or agency, but some code by which we can collaborate together if it's clearance. There's no proprietary right here. I think that's the only solution. Do what we've done in the past. It's how the Associated Press began in the 19th century.
Chris and Alison, working for organizations that have actively been involved in pool situations, and continue to be involved in pool arrangements, what do you think about applying a pool arrangement to user-generated content?
I don't know is the honest answer, because I was thinking as Mark was describing that, and he obviously came to it, because it's that obviously pool arrangements worked pre-digital, and also when you're talking about very local environments. I think it's quite difficult with stories that are international, apart from anything else, because pool arrangements that work nowadays are based on kind of very exclusive. So it might be one photographer goes in to see the newborn royal baby, and that then gets shared to all international media. That works because obviously they can stop people going into the room to take the picture, right? So they only get. Whereas here, there is, because of the technology we're talking about, you can, awful though it is for people to experience it, people can swarm in. But as we were sort of talking about it, I don't know whether there might be a way you could, for example, get news organisations in a country or in a market or whatever in those kind of situations to try and pull. I just don't know how feasible and realistic it is, especially with bigger news organisations.
Okay, I'll take might. Alison?
I think that just as, you used to see assembled reporters on the doorstep, massed, and one of them would get a picture and might share it or might not in a pool situation, but in a competitive tabloid situation, which of course, we're commercial operations and you do want to be the one that comes away with the big story and please your news editor and actually get the job done. You don't really, they might be your mates, but you climb over their backs a lot of the time, don't you, to get the story. So in the same way that was kind of, 1980s, 1990s, that whole kind of rush at social to say, can I have a picture, can I have a picture, can I have a picture, is just that replicated. And
I just want to pause you there because the difference is the scrum outside a story, they're trying to get pictures of the subject of the story. The scrum that we are forming now is around the person that's witnessed the story and is not part of the story, but is getting kind of the same abuse, or they are having that.
Sorry, isn't the difference that in the previous situation, the picture was not publicly available and it all depended on someone who could, either through persuasion or whatever other means, get that picture and then they had it as an exclusive.
Yeah.
The point now is that this stuff is out there and all of us could just right-click or whatever to download it and use it.
It is out there, but we're not. But I'm trying to tackle a really specific point here, and I'm not trying to tackle the point that the content is out there. I'm trying to tackle the point: how do we get this content without turning the people who are creating this for us off and stop them from sharing in the future? Why would you be someone if you knew the set of events that some of the people who captured the Charlie Hebdo content, if you knew what they went through, there is no way you would put yourself through that. We need that content though. So how do we stop that?
Well, so I don't have a solution. But the first piece of it, I think, is that the vast majority of people on these platforms have no idea that this is what happens to you when you put something up that, they don't necessarily think of it being newsworthy when they do it. They're behaving like a human and they want to share something in most cases. So the downside of that is I think we have a long way to go until there is mass frustration and people stop doing this. We know that the guy who shot the Charlie Hebdo video took it down and felt really bad about it after. The vast majority of people have no idea about that. So, from the journalist's perspective, we can't put ourselves in their place in that sense. Most people don't know they're going to get hit by this. So they're going to keep doing it. And that just is going to reinforce this type of behavior. People are going to keep sharing this stuff and not knowing that this is going to happen. People are going to try to go first and get that permission as fast as they can. So for me, one of the things I'm sitting here thinking about, and I don't know how it could work, and I know they're very hesitant to do things like this, is with the platforms themselves. So Twitter and Facebook, if you put something out there and all of a sudden you're getting inundated with permissions requests on it, is there perhaps something that Twitter could offer as a feature for people to say, I'm going to put the permissions levels up and attach them to the photo, and this can now no longer be embedded, but you can do this and you can do that, or you're going to have to pay me if you want to do X, Y, and Z. And that's, I think, one of the only solutions that I could see actually happening, but at the same time I know the platforms typically do not like to work on features that are that specialized, unless perhaps there's a revenue model in it.
But we haven't clubbed together coming with something like a pool before, and that might be a game changer.
So I think it could be, and remember, the reason for this is that it helps us in our competitive battle. Look at where the commercial value is today in a journalist or a news gatherer dealing with social content. It's not in monetizing directly, at least initially, because it's already out there. So the commercial value is, number one, getting it right, verifying the person has the copyright, they are who they say, and the thing is actually true. Second, then, is letting them express how they want it to be used, but most importantly, getting it quick. Now, only when it becomes licensed does the old incentives arise, where you want to get it first and hold it and be exclusive and taken off any other platform. That's not the case in what these are public interest pieces of content. Finally, I think the platforms could do a lot of work, and I think Craig's right. One way, perhaps, is YouTube, for example, is Creative Commons embedded somewhere in its platform. It takes about 6 or 7 clicks to get there to understand what it means. Firstly, more prominently putting out there what the terms of use of your content is, and perhaps prompting somebody when they load something to indicate how they perhaps want this to be distributed if it does get distribution. And so I think that could be interesting, where you say, press a button when you load it up, your location's on it, you know, you're writing a message on it, perhaps there's something that you can say or be prompted to say, because if we could educate the uploader and make sure everyone knows, if in the unlikely event one time in their life they witness something of universal value, no one's educating people about that or promoting the concept that will very easily, if I add one line to my message saying, you know, this, holy shit, I've just seen something, and if anyone out there is interested in using this, don't talk to me, just use it as you want, at least in the terms of the next 48 hours, you know.
And just, we've just got two more, or another subject to go over, and then I want to throw it open, but I think it's worth remembering that pool situations are also set up in exceptional circumstances, and not everything should be pooled for everyone, because that's not competitive.
But no, that's, I mean, and that's not true in some regards. I mean, remember, these were systematic agreements between organizations who were covering, let's say, a funeral. I remember there were maybe 5 funerals in Northern Ireland in one day. So every organization would pick one. I know this sounds terrible, but actually it was very effective and very respectful of the people who were involved here. And that was systematic. I mean, I would scurry across the 300 yards to the BBC with the physical tape, and then take the tape they had and run back. So these were very systematic. In foreign correspondence situations where I've been in war zones, we would come back to the hotel at night and trade. Not trade financially, but literally say, listen, don't go down that road tomorrow, but if you do, there's a person there you can talk to. Because we all knew that you scratch someone's back, they'll scratch it back when you need it most. And that's the incentive again.
I would like to just make one point, and I think I personally quite like this concept, but I don't want to kick the can down the road. I don't want the next fight to be then who gets the archive rights and bombard people on the archive and monetization in the same way as we are trying to get this content quickly, because I don't think that necessarily solves the problem either. So I think this is one of the first times that we've kind of potentially raised this issue. There's obviously a lot of ethical considerations, and would anyone even in the room, let's ask, what does anyone in the room think about the concept of a pool? Microphone.
Glad I've got something to do.
I think it sounds like a good idea, but I think you're conflating two things, right? I don't think the pool was. I wasn't around in the Troubles, but I would find it hard to believe that the pool was done first in the public's interest, not first in the corporate interest. And I think that's the issue. You're talking now about, well, how do you not harass witnesses after the fact? But they didn't use the pool to not harass witnesses. They used the pool so that they didn't have to have 5 reporters in 5 places. So that's my question, is how do you put it into the corporate interest to do that? Because I think that's the only thing that's going to make it succeed.
Well, one argument might be that if 100 people are messaging an individual, that individual can probably only handle a certain number of requests, and actually you might competitively, you might get the content out quicker.
Yeah, the argument would be that you would have you'd have a template set up, and so you would get the right kind of permissions in a very legally enforceable manner where the person understood it because they were dealing with one entity. So there seems to be mutual interest. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work. There's lots of challenges around this because it just takes one or a couple people to say, we're not going to be in the pool. We're going to get it before you guys, and that's it, But yeah, I mean, I think you can sort of see where there's some mutual interest in it, and to make it clear for the organization so they know they have it, and if it gets to them faster, then those are good incentives.
Alison.
So I think that I can see benefits because, at a point of breaking news when 100+ social media requests for using that content comes in, you've got a tiny opportunity of that person actually ever looking at their notifications after, say, the first 5, and they won't, so your request will probably never be seen. On the flip side, if they click something that says, never contact me, which they very well do, I'd probably do it in the heat of the moment, but actually, quite often you find people do want to talk about it further down the line, and that kind of, I can never go back to this person and approach them again because I'm in danger of then breaching a code or harassing them, and I may get my social account shut down or something. That would concern me. So I think the wording around how you would approach would be a sticking point. And finally, on a code point of view, for example, in the UK with IPSO, it is a lot more widely known now that person could immediately contact IPSO, and there would be a kind of blast go out that says, do not contact this person.
So there's just, yeah.
I have a question, by the way. I know, sorry, quickly. I think it's a great question. I'm not saying in any way that we're saying people shouldn't chase people because it's not right. You know, we've all, as journalists, been in these situations. What I'm saying is I would love to see us trying to align the commercial interest of the corporation, because that's what they are, and the public good. And I think this is one of those classic situations where we could. The incentive will always be, is it good for my company? And my argument is, in the age of social, it is possible to find ways together to reconcile those two things. And this is what this is about. I'm not saying we're doing it because we're a charity. No, we're not. But it's a good point.
That's your next campaign, right? Corporate education, that this is also there.
I think competitive and ethical have to now go hand in hand.
Because the incentive, it's not just because they should, but it's because if you do not get that permission right, you're going to get sued. And the last panel showed the ambivalence currently, because people haven't been sued. There is only the Haiti case. I can tell you right now, there's a class action lawsuit waiting to happen where somebody does, in these cases, get done, essentially. And that's why there's an incentive, and that's why the ethics and the corporate interests are aligned, I think.
So I want to just go, there's one more, sorry, yeah.
Just a quick thought on when you're looking at a breaking news situation, who decides that it's now a pull? Because obviously when you're in a breaking news situation, you're kind of wrapped up in the moment, and we've said that's what creates the need for verification, because you get caught up in it all. Who really, in that situation, can say, you know what, no, it's a pull now? Right. You know, say if Sky or whoever has that photo, they get it first, are they then going to agree to it's a pull after the fact? Is it realistic to call it a pull when it's changing so quickly?
It's not easy, but I suspect there needs to be some kind of independent code to agree on what terms a pool would be set up. That's the way that a pool arrangement is set up in other situations.
Maybe it's not like a pool that it's declared such, but let's say, for example, a news organization, let's say IPSO is a good example, a code of conduct established in each country, whereby one of the things that's put in there is we recommend when you do clear a piece of content, you leave a footprint which indicates that yes, this is cleared for use. So maybe in our messages it could be, can we use this for, it's public use, maybe also, and this will also be used by other organizations to, not hassle you. I don't know what it might be, but it doesn't have to be a formal group.
This is the other piece that it raises for this to work, is that the question is who's going to get there first, right? Because if you set it up so that, any of, say, 10 organizations in a pool, if any of them find that piece of content first, then they would have to enable the other organizations to take it. So, but for them to do that, they would say, well, if I got there first, why am I going to pool this? Because I'm giving away my advantage. So then we have to figure out some way where that first to the content can pool it, but also retain some kind of competitive advantage, right? So what do they get? Do they get 15 minutes with it first? Do they get, so that's another layer that has to be figured out in it. And it's tough because, for people to sign up for this, and if they're the ones who are first to it, then it's like it disincentivizes them to a certain extent.
I don't think that anyone thinks that this would be easy.
Yeah.
But I think that it's encouraging that we have a conversation where the term "might be possible" is used, and I think that is a step forward. There's one more area that I would like to cover. I know that many of you may have a date with Mr. Snowden across the road in a few minutes, so we will finish early. But if we could just go to the slide for a minute, communicating with individuals via social. So we talked about permissions, but actually communicating with individuals during breaking news and kind of cutting down that. There's a lot of issues around that, and you may want to get permission, but there are situations where it can be dangerous. And a scenario I'd like to put to you is there's a school, there's a lockdown, someone is tweeting photos. We've talked about needing to get permissions, needing to credit people, but in a situation like that, if you identify that person as being in a live situation, tweeting photos, we're not far away from people committing crimes, monitoring what and in Mumbai they did. So how does that twist or shape the competitive nature, and also the kind of element of cutting down communications or managing communications with people to get that content out, to get that content that that news organizations need and tell the stories, but do it in a responsible way. I think the communication side still plays into how any solution might be resolved. Chris, as someone who is on the front end of, but you're on the front end when the breaking situation like this happens.
Yeah, that's a really, really difficult one. And I don't know what the answer is. We've had it, right? And I think we would take at the moment we would take a view based on the person's activity and try and take a judgment on where they were and what their risk was. But I think we would, we're pretty aware of the kind of duty of care thing, and I think we would not cross the line if we thought that it was putting someone's life in danger. But it's pretty difficult because if the person's tweeting photos, how reasonable an assumption is it that you think, well, they're tweeting, they must be aware that people are going to reply, even if they're doing it for their friends and family, they're going to know that people are going to respond. But then, of course, they're probably not in the right place to be making that judgment for themselves about the risk that they're putting themselves.
You have a different perspective.
Just to have an example, how did you
Can you just wait for the microphone?
how did you work during the attack in Tunisia in the museum? From there, we had photos from inside, from the people who were there.
Yeah, sorry, I actually wasn't around for that, and I don't know exactly what we did there. I do know that for Charlie Hebdo, we although we were going to, putting aside the permissions argument, we were going to use the Instagram video, which was one of the first ones to emerge of a woman crouching behind a car. And then we had second thoughts, and we certainly stopped any crediting because the video was taken down. And we thought that could be because they were worried about their location. So we certainly weren't going to credit on that basis. So it is something we think about. I'm afraid I don't know if anyone else is involved in Tunisia. I don't know what we did with that. I'm sorry.
Alison, from a kind of not national, international, what do you think about communicating with individuals, and perhaps on the more kind of long form stories that you're sourcing from social, and how do you go about kind of constructing a code for your organization, or how do you go about communicating with people?
In a breaking news situation.
In a breaking news situation, yeah.
So I think if somebody, and we'll take it that it's not a child in this school, because that opens up a whole new can of worms about talking to them at all. Nobody would ever remember you for doing the right thing, but they will always remember you for doing the wrong thing, I think, and that's what, has to be our kind of byword, really, for how we work. So it would be, who are you? This might not be the dialogue, but, who are you? Where are they? Is there any, metadata in the photo that shows, exactly where they are? Can we use, street maps or something to just verify that side of things? And then, if you're talking to them, I think there has to be, and this might happen in the instance of somebody videoing, say, a shooting incident. Are you safe? Do you feel safe? Can you keep talking to us but move away? And it's really hard to have that dialogue on social. You really need to have moved on to a telephone conversation by then.
Or email or DM. You certainly need to move it privately.
You shouldn't be having that conversation publicly, because you're still holding them where they are.
Does your inclination to reach out to that person, or your kind of rules about reaching out to that person, change if a competitor reaches out to them? You see others reaching out to them. Does that then alter your opinion? There's nothing. So the competition doesn't sway.
Their responses, which might then reveal information, they might say, yeah, I took that an hour ago, I'm safe and sound at home. Obviously, then that's going to change it. So we might be keeping an eye on it. But
there's two issues here. The first is this idea, again, I'm trying to come back to a point that we have competitive advantages by doing some very careful things. Like, if you see it on Twitter, you don't talk to them on public, you talk to them on DM. Or you might revert to a messaging service. We have launched a partnership with FireChat, which is not encrypted, but it allows a much more personal connection, and it's been used by dissidents a lot. Source protection, and it's terribly difficult. And contempt of court, for example, you identify a murder suspect because you shared the social profile on their Facebook page. We don't think about these things. So there's a whole new bunch of challenges, but there's a whole new set of tools. As to the incentive of making people do dangerous things, storm chasers, or people who go out in weather events that they shouldn't be out in, just go out a photograph. The key here again is incentive. If there's a financial incentive for somebody to do something dangerous, then that just is completely wrong. In these cases, thankfully, I think most of us take this is stuff the public need to see. But they don't need to see somebody putting themselves at risk, and we don't, in any case, should never make financial money directly off that. So somebody witnessing the killing of a man called Walter Scott by a police officer now gets whatever amount of money from a private agency. How many more people will put themselves in dangers in those kind of situations, hostage crises, standoff with the cops? You know, these are things that
how many more people will run towards gunfire, essentially, because it might make them money?
For financial advantage. Maybe if they run for gunfire because they want to document something and want everyone to see it, that's different.
So we've got a few more minutes before you might need to leave for other sessions. I just wanted to kind of see if there were any thoughts from the room or any questions or no? Just agree with that. We do. Claire.
A few thoughts. First of all, about the verification. It's kind of, we have to remember that if you cannot verify things, it doesn't mean that the things was not happening in reality. And we tend to think that, and we have to find a way to deal with stuff that aren't verified, especially when places media can't or won't go. And sometimes people are trying to tell something or share a story that is extremely important to them and their community, and we not bother verifying it, or we can't verify it, we're just ignoring it. And then we're creating a different type of damage. Also it creates me thinking that, as journalism change, there is maybe less need for journalists, but for verificators. So, especially when we talk about social media and so much information is out there, it's going to increase. Maybe the whole job of being a journalist should completely shift from a different role that you have to think of. That it's something completely different. And I also wonder about the teams that are doing the verification. It's kind of a different question. How independent you are from the interest of the company and able really to work almost like in due diligence, in kind of looking at the stories and holding also your company accountable and how much you're serving them to take the story out.
That's a very interesting point.
It's a good point. I have two things to say. One is, I think there is something about, I think everyone would accept that there are what you might call basic verification skills that now just every journalist needs. I think there is an interesting debate about the really advanced stuff, like the kind of stuff that Elliot Higgins and others do, and whether that really is part of every journalist's toolkit now. I don't know, because we're asking journalists to do so much in newsrooms. So whether you do need specialists, of some kind, whether it's an agency or in-house, do you still need specialists? I feel at the moment you probably do. Coming from the BBC, we're well known for being a pretty self-flagellating when it comes to covering our own company. Well, of course, we're not, although we're commercial outside the UK, inside the UK we're not, and so I guess that isn't really, that kind of competitive, commercial problem, that church and state thing doesn't really exist so much, but I don't know whether Alison.
Yeah, I mean, the last point is an interesting one, because you're sometimes at war with yourself when you're trying to do the verification, because you're looking at something and you want it to be true, because if it is true, then you're going to use it, and there's maybe traffic and other things that come from it. And so that mentality can really affect the way we do the actual work. So when you have places like the BBC, where they have a dedicated UGC team, that team is, the way they work should ideally be sort of like, well, they shouldn't be worrying about the pressure of if they want to put it on this show or they want to use it in this way. They should be going through their process. And that was, the second point, I think, in the verification one was, one, you have to set a process, but the second one is arguably even harder, which is sticking to it. Sticking to it when there's time pressure and there's competitive pressure is really, I think, the one that distinguishes different organizations. And when it's people who most news organizations don't have the specialized group, so you have journalists who are in some ways, like I say, at war with themselves, because you want to figure it out, you want the answer, and in most cases you want to use it. You're verifying it because you want to use it, and that's it's a valid pressure, and it's one that can affect people's decisions. But, for sure, I'm sure you guys get pressured from clients when they see stuff that looks incredible and they want to use it, and you're saying, no, hold off, we're waiting. And they're like, well, give us an answer, right?
Banging on about where are the incentives these days for journalists in a breaking news situation. So the big thing I would say is that you'll never really be first anymore, but you'll be more often wrong if that's your primary incentive, to get it first. I think in our case, like you say, Craig, we have an incentive internally, and that's why, to your point, all of our people internally know the incentive is get it right. If you don't get it right, you're risking the entire company's future. But the second thing is, also, if it's wrong, call bullshit quickly. And I think we may be the first newsroom where people will literally be cheering on somebody who's just called bullshit on something, stopping a story. So for the first time in the history of journalism, there's a huge incentive to stop a story, not just start it. Now the balance is not easy. I'm simplifying now, and and I think particularly Chris, where there's a public mandate as well, it's more difficult. But I think for commercial organisations, realise where the incentives are, because your staff probably already do, and I think that's probably key to this whole debate.
So I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Thanks very much to all the panelists here, and I do think that we have got somewhere here. Claire, did you want to say something? No, right, okay. I think we have actually got some. I feel like we've moved it forward a tiny bit, which is all I could ever hope for. But and hopefully we can continue this conversation beyond this panel in the bar. Thank